I'm very happy to welcome Gerald Knaus, the founding chairman of European Stability Initiative in our program. Welcome, Gerald.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. As we see, 2024 super election year for us in Europe, I think it's crystallized now. Migration will be one of the most important subjects, if not the most important subject. So what do you see as the main, let's say, challenges for our public in Europe to put an eye on it? Because, if not before, since 2015, it's been a hot topic in the debate. So what to look after in this campaign?
Well, I think the biggest challenge, but also the biggest need for democratic forces is to not allow extremists to mix up all sorts of issues into this vague, toxic conspiracy theory of mass migration of people from all over the world to Europe that is facilitated by incompetent or treacherous elites. Because in reality, we are not dealing with a migration issue. We have different issues. We have, yes, the biggest group of refugees ever reaching the European Union since its creation, but that is a direct result of Putin's attack on Ukraine. And most of the refugees that we have in Germany, and it was a record year, 2022, and it was still a lot of Ukrainians coming last year, most of them are women and children. And there is, in fact, broad support. And not just in Germany, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Bulgaria, in the Baltic states, across Europe, because people know these people have to flee Europe. The European Union is their only country to which they can go. So this is really the challenge of mass refugee protection that needs to be provided, that has nothing to do with the images that we see from places like Lampedusa. And now that's the second issue, is the irregular migration across the Mediterranean. Now here too, I think it's clear there is a crisis. It is dramatic, but the biggest crisis, I would say, is the number of deaths at that border. We had 28,000 people who died in the last 10 years, between early 2014 and end 2023. More than 28,000 just in the Mediterranean on the way to try to reach Europe. These are deaths, like numbers of casualties like in a war. So how can we reduce that? And yes, it is true that more people crossed to Italy last year than the years before. But still, the total number of all the crossings in the Mediterranean last year was just above 250,000, which is the number that the US stops and intercepts in a single month on their border with Mexico. So the number of 250,000 people from all of Africa and the Middle East reaching Europe irregularly is high. It's a high cost. Many people die, but this is not transforming Europe. This is especially, and now I come to the third issue, a problem because we are incapable of then responding to this in line with our laws and values. Our laws and values say we need to assess who needs protection. There is no right to migration. People cannot just decide to come to Europe if they want to, but there is a right that if you claim protection needs, that is fairly assessed and that people are treated humanely. And what we have in Europe, and that's the third problem that we can't at the moment see a solution to, is that a few countries still abide by the rule of law. These are the countries where a lot of applications for asylum are filed and where a lot of protection is given. And here we've seen a shift in the last few years towards a handful of countries where an ever-increasing share of protection in the EU is given. Austria and Germany alone together are responsible for almost half of all the positive asylum decisions in the whole European Union. A few other countries, Switzerland, outside the EU, but in Schengen, and the Benelux countries, and of course France, are also important countries of destination for asylum seekers. And a lot of countries in Europe are basically trying to make them move on to those where the rule of law is still applied. And that is a problem of solidarity and organization inside the European Union. But these three problems all require very different responses. And just to show the contradiction between the far right's positions on migration and their foreign policy ideas, what the far right is proposing across Europe is to let Ukraine alone, to lose the war, not to support Ukraine. And if that happens, we would have millions more refugees, of course, from Ukraine fleeing to the European Union, which then again the far right would say, we need to stop them without proposing how. So here we need to differentiate, and we need to find answers to concrete but very diverse sets of problems.
And if you are an ordinary European citizen, which basically struggling with their own life, you know, cost of living, inflation, all the problems we have in common more or less throughout Europe, and who doesn't basically, when he or she scrolls on their mobile phones through the social network, in this digital information chaos, is Europe capable basically to hold this line? Because we'll come to Germany, but we saw and we are seeing how the far right is rising in the polls everywhere around Europe. So how should this narrative be kept, or how should we respond to this, you know, politics of fear and grievances of the people, where you mix the story of migration very easily?
Well, I think what is very important, and you point to the importance of images that people see on their smartphones. People think in images, and dramatic, emotional images are the ones they remember. So if I would talk about numbers and say, listen, it was so and so many people who reached Spain from all of Africa, this is not much more than people who left France to go to the United Kingdom with smugglers across the channel. People don't remember the number. People might remember the image. And so we have a challenge on this. But the response has to be a much more clear communication of what might, for example, reduce, without violating human rights, migration from West Africa or North Africa to Spain. If we can show, and here we come to this core idea of safe third countries. If we can show that we can demotivate people from getting into fishing boats off the coast of Senegal to go to the Canary Islands, because we have an agreement with a country in West Africa that says we are prepared to take back the people who leave, and we are able, in an ideal world, and this can be organized quickly, we are able to host UNHCR doing the asylum determination of the people that are returned, let's say in Senegal or in Morocco. So we take away the incentive for people to cross the Atlantic and die in large numbers, because when they get into these boats, and it's mostly young men who want to have a better future and who know if they reach Spain at the moment, they will not be returned. We take away the incentive by saying, from this moment on, we stop those boats, not through letting them drown. On the contrary, we need to rescue everyone, not through denying the right to claim asylum, but by organizing that a serious asylum procedure might take place after return in West Africa. Now, why would West African countries agree to that? Only if we offer legal migration in return, and only if we offer resettlement of refugees in return. But both of this makes sense. So we would be like Canada. We would say we are actually in need of legal, these young men who risk their lives. If we could tell them, here, if you learn, do a year, a Spanish course online, or an English course, or learn German or learn French, if you have certain skills, we help you acquire them. You can apply and work legally, and we need you, and you will be legal. You will not be exploited on the margin of our economies in agricultural fields. We bring you in legally. Here is a path, but don't take the fishing boat that risks, ending up on the bottom of the Atlantic, because there you will be returned. But here is a legal path. And by the way, we talk to UNHCR and say, like Canada, every year we take a larger number of people in need of protection. UNHCR can help us select them among those who need protection, and we bring them too legally without risking their lives. Show images of control.
We don't have much time. I want to ask you two, I think, important points. For example, in our part of the world, Croatia is the newest EU member. We have now double narratives building up. One is we are in need of foreign workers. We have huge brain drain. We have, as Europe, but here very sharply, seen a negative demographic trend. We're in need of foreign workers. We had an influx of huge amount of people coming from mid-Asia, plus we are on geographical point on the border with Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we have people crossing and passing by and dying here on our borders. So we see the right wing is building the narratives of, you know, common words that come from them. From, you know, they will take our jobs, they will rape our women, you know, all the things that are there in the playbook. How do you, or can you calm the public in this kind of situation? Because it's, you know, it's there, and traditional media are basically picking up these words and putting it out there, maybe unconsciously, maybe, you know, they are not capable of understanding the process. So how do you handle that?
Well, by thinking creatively about ways that can actually have a visible impact and that take away people's fears. Now, I give you a counterintuitive suggestion, and I presented this to politicians actually in Croatia, and I think this should be a priority this year. Now that we are anticipating very soon Romania and Bulgaria to join Schengen, the idea that it is necessary to try to stop anyone crossing the Western Balkans, that we need to have a lot of border police at the border of Croatia and Bosnia, or between Western Balkan countries, in order to control migration, becomes totally bizarre, because now anyone who can leave Greece through Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, or Romania can reach Germany directly in a borderless Schengen area, right? So this is the moment for Croatian politicians to propose to the European Union, let's offer Schengen entry to all the Western Balkan countries if they fulfill certain conditions, right? So this gives the EU a lot of influence, and then the vision would be that the border between Bosnia and Croatia, between Herzegovina and Croatia, becomes invisible, like the border between Germany and Poland, because these are Schengen borders. And we concentrate all our border protection efforts at the border with Turkey, which is the only real external border of the EU. So Croatia, instead of having these daily, weekly dramas at its borders with Bosnia, trying to catch desperate people who cross somewhere in the dark at the green border, in the end, they all make it. You know, nobody is stopped for long in Bosnia. But how much suffering and how much pain and how much violation of human rights, Croatia actually turns the tables and says, here is a better idea. And then we need to negotiate with Turkey. How do we have Turkey as a partner to reduce irregular migration at the border with Turkey? And here again, Croatia, and you pointed out, is one of many countries interested in labor. Now, if you organize this with Turkey, if you say, young Turks who are now in an economic crisis, there is a strong demography. Many young Turks of working age in Turkey do not find a good job. However, these are no longer Anatolian peasants who don't, you know, read and write. They've been 12 years in school. You know, they live in Istanbul, which alone is one of the biggest industrial centers in the world. If you say we allow them to work legally, we offer legal work, we offer, you know, possibilities for legal migration into our labor market. We also argue in favor of making it easier for Turks to travel. So let's offer Turkey something attractive. In return, Turkey helps us control irregular migration at the border with the EU. And the whole of Southeastern Europe can become an area without borders. Croatia would benefit like no other EU member state from such a policy. And it's a policy that brings control. It's not a policy of opening and losing control. It's one of restoring control without violation of human rights.
You've mentioned, I think, key word, which is creativity in politics. We don't see much of it, unfortunately, in these times, which are crucial for Europe. And my last question, we saw what happened in Germany, the publication of the story from Correctiv, which is part of our network, European Digital Media Observatory, made a storm. People ran out of the street. There was, of course, the meeting of far-right extremists with some politicians from AfD, CDU. What do you see will come out of it? AfD is still the second or the third strongest party. Polling, people went out on the street. Some say it was the biggest gathering since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And we know what correctives German democracy has in that regard post-Second World War. But is this enough? Are these revelations enough for the processes that are happening?
Well, I mean, first of all, none of these revelations should have been surprising to anyone who's been following the far right in Europe and in Germany. And so there is also the sobering note. I mean, Viktor Orban has talked in his election campaign 2018 about how London has fallen to Islamization because it has a Pakistani origin mayor. I mean, this racist discourse of Islamization, of cities losing their soul and their identity has been there for years. And the logical consequence, if you say that your nation is destroyed through migration, well, then you have to do something. And what do? You expel those you don't like. And here, again, I think the Balkan or the Southeast European experience of the last few decades is a warning. You know, people who say they want to expel minorities are fully capable of doing it once they have the opportunity. I mean, we've seen people being expelled. I mean, Croats being expelled by the Yugoslav army in 91. In Bosnia, the so-called ethnic cleansing was nothing but the implementation of these fantasies of mass crimes to move populations of people you don't like. We are seeing it now in Ukraine. We've seen it in the Caucasus with the expulsion of the Armenians in Karabakh. Just last year, more than 100,000 people, a minority problem solved by, and I put it under quotation mark, destroying the minority. We've seen that throughout history. And so we must take leaders like Höcke, who is the leader of the AfD in Thuringia, one of the 16 German states where there are elections this year, and who is leading in the polls, and who's written a book a few years ago where he said that he wants to put so much pressure on the non-autochthonous, you know, the non-origin, I don't know, I mean, what he means is clear. He means Muslims and perhaps Africans. Those who he thinks do not belong in Germany, we need to put so much pressure on them that they go by themselves or they will need to be expelled. And he says openly that this will require measures that will make us feel uncomfortable, but it's necessary because it's a war against migrants or a war against those who are different. Now, we've seen that. And the reality is also that Höcke is still leading in the opinion polls in Thuringia. So I think it's useful that people have realized how serious this is. It's useful that they are out in the streets to show that there is still a vast majority of the public that would oppose this with passion, you know, going out in the cold. The one thing it shows is you care. So that's important. That's better than just having Facebook likings or social media activism. But it will not be enough if the people with these ideas get to government. And so for this, we need policies where the democratic parties come together and show that the narrative at the heart of the racist identitarian fantasy of the great replacement through migration, the killing of our identity, that this narrative is false, murderous, but also thrives from the sense of loss of control we've discussed at borders that is completely blown out of proportion by the far right, but to which we can have a creative, constructive response of humane control. So we need to attack the AfD. It is not interested in control. It's interested in racism and fantasies of national purity, völkisch, as they say in German, which is the 1930s fantasies. We need to confront them head on. They want to destroy democracy and the rule of law, but we need to get some of their voters who care and fear loss of control back to the democratic parties by showing that, of course, there are ways to have control in line with the European Convention on Human Rights. But for the seriousness of the threat, not just in Germany, also in Austria, and for the fact that we've had a leader in Hungary who's been speaking like this for years, and people sort of treated him as a little bit of a joke. You know, remember Juncker joking that he was a dictator. But the problem with Orban wasn't what he was doing so far. You know, he didn't expel people yet in large numbers from Hungary. I mean, the problem was what he was saying, that he thinks this is legitimate and that he supports those forces that can reverse what he called the Islamization of European cities. And that is just a call for mass crimes.
Gerald Knaus, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I hope that our citizens will be well-informed citizens ahead of the European elections in June and all the other elections that you've mentioned this year. I know it's hard. I know grievances are there, but we need to have also this historical perspective with us that you explained so perfectly. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you. All the best.